Namo Buddhaya. Good evening. Welcome to the Buddha Dharma TV. I'm Lisa Chu. First, before we start our program, here is a group of Buddhist monks paying homage to the Supreme Buddha.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato
Venerable Ajahn Brahmali from Norway. He first became interested in Buddhism and meditation in his early age of 20s. Before he was fully ordained, he was an aid preceptor. His knowledge of Pali and of the Sutta is excellent. His talk on Saturday, that was yesterday, was on the superpower of patience, was well received. Let us welcome Ajahn Brahmali to give the second part of his talk today.
One of the things I really recommend you to do is start to look at people in a new way. One of the biggest problems in life, one of the things the Buddha said we should always try to deal with is ill will and anger, because it's so destructive. It destroys our interpersonal relationships. It creates wars in the world. It creates all of these kind of terrible things, all this ill will that we have. So if we can reduce ill will at least a little bit, what a wonderful thing that would be for society, for ourselves personally, for everything really. So how can we do that? Well, first thing is to understand that ill will or anger almost always has to do with other people, right? Other people are the most irritating thing in the world. There was a famous, was that again? I think it was Ajahn Brahm who told me this. I get everything I know from Ajahn Brahm. And what did he say again? There was something about, I think the biggest problem in the world is other people, or something to that effect. That's what I think he said. I think it was it was some kind of philosopher. And that is true. So people are both the things that are closest to us, that mean the most to us, and they're also the biggest problem in our life. It's kind of this very two-edged sword in a sense. And so how can we learn to look at people in the way so that we have more understanding, more compassion, more time? We don't react so quickly. We don't get irritated and angry so easily. And one of the ways of doing that is to remember that just like you are conditioned, they too are conditioned. And the conditioning runs incredibly deep. And if you are faced with someone and they are behaving badly towards you, actually, it has nothing to do with you. It has to do with the other person. It is their conditioning that happens to come out in your presence. It may feel like they are attacking you. It may feel like they're saying bad things to you, but it's not really about you at all. It's just about you being present when these things come out in them. If someone like you had been exactly in that position, they too would have to bear the brunt of that negative qualities in that person. So you depersonalize it. It is the other person who has a problem. You don't actually have a problem at all. You just watch them. Oh yeah, okay, whatever. You don't say those things, just think those things. Otherwise you get into serious trouble. And you realize that actually their conditioning is what is coming out. And this is another aspect of this idea, Buddhist idea of non-self. People don't act out of a sense of self because I want to be nasty towards you. I want to be nasty towards Ajahn Brahmali. Ajahn Brahmali is a bad monk. I'm going to do bad things. I'm going to tell him off or whatever. Something like that, and it's not because of a sense of self that they decide that. It's because of cause and conditions coming together at that time, and then they can't stop themselves. These things come out of them whether they want to or not. And I'm sure you have often seen that in your own life. Sometimes things come out of you. You may say things or do things that you rather not say or do. But the power of the conditioning is so strong at that time, actually you can't stop it. And other people who have less kind of spiritual inclination than you have, they may have no awareness at all of what is going on. It just comes out of them. And what you can do then at that particular point, because you are now being patient with them, you understand that there is a problem, yeah? What you can do at that point is actually have compassion for them, because they are conditioned in the way that they do bad things. And if they do bad things, it is not the other person who has to face most of the consequences, it's they themselves who have to face most of the consequences of their bad actions. Because if you live a life of a lot of badness, you tend to feel bad about yourself. You lose your sense of self-worth. And of course, from a Buddhist point of view, down your track, if you get reborn or whatever, you have lots of bad qualities, it's going to have terrible consequences. So the moment you realize that, first of all, you get patient with the other person because you understand, actually, it's nothing to do with me. They are the one who have a problem. You get patient. And then you turn that patience into compassion afterwards because you understand they have a problem. They are heading in the wrong direction. They are like a sick person, said the Buddha. It says in the Buddhist sutras. Someone who is acting badly a lot is like a sick person. It's a very beautiful way of thinking about it, yeah? Because the moment you see that, they are sick because they are deluded, because they are walking in darkness, because they have no idea what they're doing. The moment you see that, you have compassion for them, just like you have compassion for a sick person in real life. So this is how patience, again, allows you to stand back, allows you to see people in a new light. So first of all, we use the patience I've been saying now to be more moral and to change the direction of our supertanker. Then we use patience, how to deal with people and to reduce our reaction towards others, have more time for others, and not get angry so easily. But the last and the most powerful way of using patience is in your meditation practice. And this is something that I say whenever I teach a meditation retreat. I say this in almost every talk I give. Yeah, so if you have heard this before, it is probably because you have heard it before. Yeah. And what this beautiful discourse by the Buddha, he talks about the process of meditation, what it feels like from a first-person perspective. Yeah, what does meditation actually feel like? And he goes through a long process. And he shows stage by stage how it evolves mentally, what it feels like to meditate. Yeah? And he starts off by saying at the very beginning of this process is sila. Sila is a Pali word for morality or ethics or kindness, these kind of things. And from that sila comes a sense of non-regret. Yeah? Non-regret means that your mind is bright, your mind is clear because you don't have any darkness in there which kind of drags you down. That non-regret leads to what is called pamudja in Pali. Yeah, okay, I'll translate it for you. Pamudja means like joy, yeah? And that joy then, when you keep carrying on your meditation, you're watching the breath or whatever, leads to what is called piti. Piti is like considered like rapture. Rapture is often kind of a physically felt pleasure, and now it's already becoming very, very pleasurable. Then from that piti comes passaddhi, which is a deep sense of tranquility in your meditation. That deep sense of tranquility leads to an even more powerful sense of happiness called sukha in Pali. And that sukha, because the pleasure is so incredibly powerful, leads to the complete stillness of the mind, which is known as samadhi in the Pali language. Yeah? That is the process of meditation in the suttas. Isn't that extraordinary? If you look back on the terms I was just mentioning, right? It starts off with virtue. Okay, virtue, maybe not so interesting. Okay, non-regret. Okay, that's better, right? Already kind of on the right track. Then joy. Okay, now we're getting into business, right? Then rapture. Rapture is even more joy than joy. It's like a kind of physically felt rapture in the body and in the mind as well. Now it's getting really, really good. Then tranquility. So based on that rapture, you go even further down to a very deep sense of peace and tranquility in the mind. From that deep sense of tranquility in the mind, you get an even higher kind of happiness, sukha. From that higher kind of happiness comes this complete stillness of the mind called samadhi. That is the process of meditation for you in brief. It can be expanded out a lot, as it is in the Anapanasati Sutta, the sutta on mindfulness of breathing. But that is what meditation is about. Isn't that extraordinarily attractive? All about happiness, all about peace, all about tranquility, all the way. And what does that lead to? All of that tranquility and happiness, it leads to what is called yata bhuta jnanadassana in Pali, which means knowledge and vision according to reality. So it leads to insight, it leads to understanding, it leads to the uncovering of the nature of the mind and the nature of who we are, basically, as human beings. Oh. So the process of meditation, which is so beautiful and has so many beautiful aspects to it, also leads to the most powerful insights we can possibly have on the Buddhist path. Yeah, everything coming together. Yeah? Now, I don't know. When I read sutras like this, I thought, "Wow, I'm going to be a Buddhist." Yeah, you can't hold me away from Buddhism. This is exactly what I want. Yeah, this is so powerful. And who doesn't want happiness? I mean, everyone wants happiness in their life. Is that true? Yeah? Is anyone here who would rather not have too much happiness? Everyone wants happiness. No one wants more problems. No one wants more suffering. No one wants to break a leg all the time, right? Because it's painful to break a leg. We want to have less suffering. We want to have more happiness. And so when you read things like this, and you understand that the happiness that is described here is not just ordinary happiness. It is actually very, very profound. Yeah, it is a happiness that people like the Buddha would have, like the great meditation masters in the world would have. We are so still. When you see a person like that in meditation, they are so still. You wonder whether they have died. Have you ever seen that before? Someone meditating so still that it looks like they have died. There's a nice story about that, and this is kind of, again, one of these meditation stories, and it just comes to mind now as I'm talking about this, but it's a nice story. And this was a story from Thailand. I can't remember exactly where I heard it, and this was in the early days when Ajahn Brahm himself was a young monk, so this must have been maybe 35, no, 40, maybe more, actually 40 years ago, maybe 45 years ago. And in Thailand in those days, in the International Forest Meditation Monastery, they would have all-night sits, sit meditation all night, yeah? And so they go from maybe starting at about, I don't know what, sometime in the 7 in the evening, and then go till the next morning. And next morning they would just go straight out on arms around afterwards. And during those meditation sits, very often most people can't really make it. Yeah, it's too arduous to do that sitting all night. And so the monks are there, and then all the lay people. These are the lay people from the Thai villages, yeah? And these people in the Thai village have been sitting on the floor all their lives, and they know how to sit cross-legged, and they can sit cross-legged probably for days, but at least for hours without any kind of problem. And many of these were kind of the ancient Thai ladies, yeah, who come to the temple all the time to listen to the Dhamma and take part in these things. And so they would sit there on one of these nights, yeah, and as the night was going on, more and more monks would leave, more and more lay people would leave, and at a certain point during the night, there was only 2 people left in that hall, in that meditation hall. One of them was Ajahn Brahm. He was sitting on a high seat. The monks always sitting on the high seat, and one of them was one of these ancient Thai ladies, yeah, who could sit forever on the floor. And she would observe Ajahn Brahm, and after a while, she realized that he hasn't moved at all for the last 2 hours. No movement. He looks like a rock. When a human being looks like a rock, something must be wrong, right? So she keeps on observing him, and when she is absolutely sure of her case, she leaves the hall, she goes out, and she gets hold of another monk and says, "There's a dead monk in the hall, please go and check it out." Yeah? That's kind of a cool story, because of course Ajahn Brahm wasn't dead, unless he has kind of reincarnated and come back, but he's still here. So the idea is that when you go into deep samadhi, it is so profound, it is so deep, the bliss is so utterly encompassing that you don't move at all for hours upon hours upon hours. You look like you are dead, basically. There's another story about that which I won't tell now because time is getting short. But there's another story about the monk who was burned on a funeral pyre, yeah, because they thought he was dead. And so they kind of put this big kind of funeral pyre, and they lit it all, and then they went away, and the next morning that same monk came for Pindabat, for alms around, right? They came for alms around. But we burnt you yesterday on a funeral pyre, yeah, what's going on here? And this is because the samadhi was so profound, like, according to the sutta, the fire can't even touch you. That's the story anyway. I'm just telling you the story. I'm not sure what exactly happened there. So the idea anyway here is that meditation at this level is extremely interesting. Yeah, you're starting to find the meaning of life itself. And this is the promise of the Buddha, that actually you are discovering the meaning of life itself when you practice these things. Because the stillness, the sense of purpose, the sense of having no more craving, no more urge to go anywhere, basically means that you're discovering the meaning of life. So if you want to discover the meaning of life, practice Buddhism. If you don't want to discover it, you can do something else. That's really entirely up to you. But I really recommend the meaning of life discovery. It's pretty useful to know the meaning of life, because then you have a sense of direction. Yeah, you know what to do with your life. But what my point here is, because this talk is about patience, so my point here is that how you move between these various stages in meditation is actually very interesting, because you move then from non-regret to pamudja, to joy. You move from joy to rapture. You go from rapture to tranquility. Yeah, how is it that you move between these stages? And the Buddha says something very interesting in this context. He says that this is not to be done by an act of intention or by an act of will. Yeah? So in other words, this whole process does not happen because you make it happen, right? Intention and will is actually a mistake in this case. So the Buddha then says it is a dhammata that you go from one stage to the next one. Dhammata means it is in accordance with nature. And this is what I said before. Everything in Buddhism, all of these things we do is always in accordance with nature. So if you want nature to take its course, you cannot really make nature happen by using willpower. If you try to use willpower on nature, you have a problem. And the simile that I always hear that Ajahn Brahm always tells, and which is a nice simile, is like you have a little child, right? And the mother takes the little child and says, okay, I'm going to show you how to grow plants. So they give the child a little sunflower seed or something, and the mom said, okay, put that sunflower seed into the ground, and then you water, a little bit of water every day, not too much water, not too little, otherwise it might dry out or it might drown, and then you see what happens. And after a few days, the child does what his mom has said. It starts to sprout, and the child gets really excited. Mommy, it's coming out of the ground. Yeah, look at this. And there's a little thing coming out of the ground. But then after another couple of days, it is growing so slowly from the child, right? It's not happening. So the child decides, I'm going to help nature a little bit. So it grabs hold of the little sprout, starts pulling it. And that is a very, very bad idea when you're dealing with a little plant. If you pull a little plant, you're going to destroy the little plant. And this is the idea of using willpower on nature. If you use willpower on nature, you're going to destroy the natural process itself. So what do we need to do? We need to stand back, and we need to allow nature to take its course. That is really the only way nature can happen. And of course, to be able to stand back and allow nature to take its course, you have to be patient. You have to really understand that this is actually what is going on. And so the whole process of meditation is the ability to stand back and allow things to grow according to its own cause and conditions. And then you're going to be able to do this meditation properly. Patience is ultimately what this is all about. Standing back, cause and effect taking root. And when cause and effect really are strong enough, the process will happen by itself. And you will have noticed when I talked about this process, I said that it starts out with sila being virtue, morality, and kindness. So if the process is not working fast enough, what you have to do is you have to work harder on your morality, on your kindness. That is what makes this whole thing happen. Then it starts to come out as a consequence. So this is, in brief, the idea of how patience can be a superpower on our path. Instead of trying to make things happen, using willpower, causing nature to happen in a faster way than nature actually can happen, what we should always do in Buddhism, we should always stand back and ask about causes and conditions. And the moment you stop to interfere, you actually have more ability to observe properly. And when you observe properly, you can see how the causality, the nexus of causality works. You can see when I do this, it leads to bad consequences. When I do that, it leads to good consequences. And then you start to get an understanding of how the process of spiritual growth actually happens. And then when you do that, what you do is that you fortify those causes and conditions that give rise to spiritual growth, and you try to eliminate those causes and conditions that reduce spiritual growth. And you become wise about the path rather than using willpower. And this is one of the beautiful teachings that I always got from Ajahn Brahm. Ajahn Brahm always said, use wisdom power, don't use willpower. It is wisdom power that gets you somewhere on the spiritual path, not willpower. So you stand back, observe, you learn about causality, you learn about conditionality, and as you learn that, then you enable this whole path to happen in this way. And this is really how the Buddhist path works. And to be able to do that, the one thing that you really need is patience. And if you understand the nature of causality, you will be patient, because you will actually figure out that driving the process through willpower is never going to work. So learn to think like this, yeah? And gradually, as you do this, you're taking the sense of self out of the equation, yeah? Taking this idea that I am going to do this, you leave that to one side, and you're also undermining the sense of self at the same time. And of course, ultimately on the spiritual path, it is, from a Buddhist perspective, the idea is to eliminate the sense of self entirely, because the sense of self is the root problem. And now you can start to see a little bit why the sense of self is so problematic, yeah? Because the sense of self wants to do nature. Instead of allowing nature to happen, it interferes in natural processes. And when it interferes in natural processes, it destroys the ability of those processes actually to happen on their own accord. And that is why it is so problematic. So if you can undermine it a little bit, great. Then you're going to be on the right track. So I have probably talked too much already, so I'm going to stop there. So usually I like to give people a chance to comment or to ask questions or whatever you like. So because some of these things can maybe be a bit challenging, and I don't know if all of you are. I forgot to ask at the beginning whether you are beginners or kind of old practitioners or whatever, but now it's too late, so whatever happened. So. But please feel free to ask any questions or comment or whatever you would like to do at this particular point. And I would like to say anything? Yeah, please. Yeah.
Somewhat technical, I'm afraid, but it will also do with one's experience. When you speak about sense of self and ego, are you speaking about Sakaya Ditti or Asmimana or something else?
I'm talking about both of those. And so Sakaya Ditti is the view that is called like sometimes called personality view or identity view or something like that. And it's this idea that there is some sort of inherent essence to a human being. It's this view that there is something, that me is real somehow, I am real somehow. That is the idea of Sakaya Ditti. And once you have that view, then the ego emerges from that, and it takes various forms. Yeah, you identify with something, you are somebody, and it comes from the Sakaya Ditti. Asmimana is the conceit I am, yeah, and it's a more profound thing, and that is what even if you understand or you see through Sakaya Ditti, Asmimana is still there until you reach full awakening, and so that is also always present, yeah, the conceit I am, but the conceit I am has a consequence, and one of the consequences of the conceit I am, once you say I am, that I am has to have certain properties to it. It cannot exist without properties. So once you have a feeling I am, you have to take certain parts of yourself to be that I am. Yeah? I am cannot exist on its own without actually having properties. And those properties of the sense of self will be taken from the 5 khandhas, the 5 personality aspects. So you will say, I am this feeling, I am the will, I am the consciousness, I am the body. And then because you are these things, and because the world affects your mind, that sense of self also goes into the world. Yeah? And that is why we have ownership in the world, because we want to control the world, because when we control the world, we also control our feelings. Yeah? If you have a nice home, you control the sense that you feel safe at night, you have a nice bed to sleep in, you have entertainment, you have a nice food, a nice kitchen, you can kind of mix up a nice meal or whatever. Yeah, this is kind of the purpose of a home, to have a place where you feel safe and where you can kind of enjoy yourself. So the sense of self reaches into the world, and that's why we attach in the world. And the moment you have a sense of self, all of these things take place. The cravings, the attachments, all of the problems arise actually from that in this way. So I'm talking about everything, all of that, and probably more as well, but that's a good starting point, yeah. Okay, so please, you don't have to ask really fancy questions like that one. You can very welcome to ask really simple, very simple questions. So please don't feel shy. I promise not to bite or to be nasty if you ask something. Please, yeah.
When I come back from retreat, I can see in myself that my levels of patience are a lot more higher. And when I'm thrown back into my normal life, with young children and work and things like that, I can feel my patience getting a lot lower.
Yeah.
Do you think that in amongst the responsibilities and normality of life out there, well-being is limited? There are limits to well-being?
I think it is difficult, yeah, and I know what you mean by being on retreat versus kind of being in your ordinary job and these things. There certainly is a difference there, and you should never really expect to have that level of patience in your ordinary life. I think that would be asking for too much. But what you can do is that you can, the main thing in life, if you really want to have success in a meditation, is coming back to morality and sila and kindness and these kind of things. So the main thing in daily life is to ensure that you are kind. Yeah, that is really what you really want to do. And so the most important thing sometimes is just to kind of program this into your mind so deeply, yeah, and to understand this is so important. That even if you lose your patience, okay, you stand back. You know, I'm losing my patience now. Okay, let me disappear for a while. Make myself scarce, because this is scary. I'm about to say something wrong. So maybe you lock yourself in a toilet cubicle or something like that, just to get away because there are people around or whatever it is. But you take the idea of morality so seriously that even if you do lose your patience more easily, you're still able to restrain yourself. You're still able to hold back because you know how important it is. Yeah. So I think that there is no way that we're going to be able to, sustain the same level of mindfulness, the same level of patience or whatever in ordinary life. But you can still do things that ensure that you live in a good way, so as not to destroy your ability to come back to meditation again later on. Because if you end up saying many bad things, then you try to meditate, the meditation is going to be messed up, and then that kind of destroys the whole purpose of the spiritual path in a sense. Yeah. Probably not a very helpful answer, but I'm afraid that's, sometimes, yeah. Good, yeah, great. So, yeah, please.
Can I ask a question about the Vipassana meditation?
You can ask any question you want, yeah.
So it's because I was on the retreat, and I actually picked up your leaflet, which was really helpful about Vipassana meditation and Samadhi meditation.
Oh, that's Samatha meditation, Vipassana. Yeah.
So there's the whole breathing meditation kind of contains all of the watching things arise and pass away and achieving calmness and potentially going into jhanas. And the awakening thing, or that is related to, is not necessary to go into jhanas, or I just
yeah. No, I would say don't worry about that. Whether you need jhanas to have awakening or not, because it's kind of it becomes a very theoretical thing. The most important thing is you practice the Noble Eightfold Path, and you never stop that path. You don't say, jhanas are not required, so I'm going to stop now. I'm not going to go any further. That would be crazy, right? That's a kind of silly idea. You just practice the path as far as you can. And if you get to the doorstep of the jhana and you can attain them, of course you attain them, because they're part of the path. But if you can't attain them, well, then the question is redundant anyway. So either way, it's redundant. But so just, it's kind of a theoretical thing. I think people want to know this because they want to know that I can't attain them, but I can still achieve awakening. Yeah, that's kind of the thing that people want to reason why they ask these kind of questions. Yeah. But again, just come back to the practice. So the practice, we know what the practice is. We know what the 8 factors of the Noble Eightfold Path are. So you practice those, however far that takes you. At some point during that path, you will achieve some kind of insight, which is equivalent to awakening or whatever. It doesn't matter where it is. You just carry on, and this will happen as part of the course as you do this. And that is really, I think, the right kind of attitude to have. So when you do mindfulness of breathing, that process, at any point, the deeper you go, the more powerful will be your ability to have insight at the end of that meditation. So if you get to kind of the blissful breath, you will have some idea of looking back on that blissful breath. You will see the process of meditation. You will understand it in a certain way. The painful feelings have disappeared. The body has largely disappeared. So you start to have some understanding of impermanence and these kind of things through seeing the changing of things. The deeper the process goes, the more ability you have to understand impermanence and suffering and non-self, because it's just bleeding obvious when things kind of fade away and disappear, right? You can't really avoid it anymore. And so, when you get to the reason why the jhanas are so powerful is because so much has disappeared, so much has faded away, almost the whole world is gone. All that is left is this very, very powerful bliss. And so that enables you, first of all, the mind is very powerful, and because so much has happened, there's so much data there, right, that you can't really miss it anymore and you see what's going on there. So just practice like this, yeah, and then see, and then you will see, it will, at some point you will have the results that you want.
So it's more about the process, being with and enjoying the process.
Yeah. Enjoying the process and using whatever you have in that process to gain a little bit of insight, and then that little bit of insight will help you to get more samadhi, more stillness. More stillness will get more insight, and they work together in this way. Yeah. Good. Okay. Please, yeah.
I don't know what you have explained right now. Is this just a view to hold in the background? Is this what it is? Or should I be asking myself, is the Rupa there regularly?
Is Rupa there? Yeah. No, it's more like, no, you just do that when you meditate, yeah? When you go into meditation, especially when you have a successful meditation. Because what you will see is that, well, what is it that we experience during meditation? Well, what we experience is the 5 khandhas, the 5 aggregates, yeah? The 5 aspects of personality. That is what we are experiencing. Yeah? So when you are going through a process, you're actually seeing a change in the 5 aggregates. The deeper the meditation is, the more of these aggregates actually fade away. And sometimes it ceases completely. And so when you come out of your meditation afterwards, you cannot help but seeing what's happening. Yeah, if the body was completely gone for an hour, wow, the body was gone for an hour. You can't help seeing that, and that's kind of the what's going on there. So you use that process of meditation to gain insight into these 5 khandhas, the 5 aggregates, because that is what that process is. It is a particular evolution of those aggregates in a sense they become less and less and less. It's called the viraga in Pali. It means like fading away. And then eventually they cease altogether. And the more they fade away, the more they cease, the more insight you get into them. So there's something you use for meditation. In daily life, it is not powerful enough. You can't really do very much. Yeah, it's like becomes like Mickey Mouse. Not even Mickey Mouse, actually. Mickey Mouse probably tell me off if I said that. But, it doesn't really work in daily life. It's just too... the mind is not powerful enough. You don't see enough. All you see is a very superficial kind of change. And that superficial change doesn't really have much effect on your ability to understand the world, if you like. Yeah. Does it make sense? Yeah? Okay, good then.
Please, at some point you said something about this losing your sense of self in good ways, and then you also mentioned losing your sense of self in bad ways, I think.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering, exactly what you meant by that.
Right, yeah.
I was just curious.
And that's a good point, and I think it is an important point, actually. But there are, if you are mentally unstable, for example, you can actually lose your sense of identity and sense of self in kind of psychologically bad ways. And sometimes you get people who are in psychological difficulties coming to Buddhist retreats and Buddhist meditation because they want to sort themselves out. Fair enough. How can you blame them? But that is very important that you get good instructions. Because if you don't get good instructions, you can have very bad negative psychological consequences. So make sure that you are okay. Make sure that you don't keep confused and deluded in your meditation, things heading in the wrong direction. Because there are things like... depersonalization, the kind of very severe psychological things that can happen if you take these things too far. So that is what I meant by that. So you have to make sure that if it feels nice, if it is joyful, if it is peaceful, then it is a good kind of ego reduction. If it feels unstable and bad and dodgy, then it's a bad kind of reduction of the ego. Yeah. I have a feeling we probably have to come towards the end. We're going to talk a little bit about the Anukampa project towards the end. So, one more question? Yeah, you sure? Okay. One more question says, yeah, I'm just the slave here, so I just do whatever the boss, because she has invited me, so I'm very happy to do whatever is required. Please, yeah.
You talk about how intention and volition can get in the way of the practice. But one of the I know in a lot of the sutras there's a real talk about kind of the effort required and how striving is quite a big part of the path for some people. How do those two fit?
Gel, yeah, right. Well, I mean, I think the interesting thing, and this is kind of what you see in the sutras in many places, the Buddha talks about getting rid of, overcoming, obliterating bad qualities. And when it says obliterating, it sounds like they take out the sledgehammer, yeah, and really kind of whack it to smithereens. That's what it sounds like. But then you start to read it broadly in the sutras, you start to recognize that actually the only way to really get rid of something is actually through wisdom. If you use willpower to get rid of something, you tend to kind of push it aside into a corner of the mind, and then it comes back with a vengeance later on as soon as you let go of that willpower. But if you want to overcome something, if you see something as problematic, if you see something as suffering, and you see it with wisdom, actually the mind lets go like that. And that is the idea of using wisdom power. So when we talk about right effort, the best way to have right effort is to kind of understand things, use wisdom, and use that to kind of overcome things. Occasionally, you may have to use a bit of willpower. I'm not saying it is always wrong, but 95% of the time it's probably wrong. So use wisdom, and then when it comes to actual, so that is kind of in ordinary life to kind of live in a good way. But then it comes to the meditation practice, and that is where really the right effort can be called patience. Right? So the idea is that if your mind is kind of running around a lot, you're thinking about all kinds of things, or maybe you're getting really tired and lethargic or whatever, then it is using the mind in such a way as to let go of those problems. That is right effort. So you want to get rid of the thinking mind. How do you do that? Well, by being content, by understanding the nonsensicality, or whatever the word is, of those thoughts, of how uninteresting they are, how there is a greater happiness to be had by focusing on the breath, for example, all of these kind of things. So very often, patience or, again, wisdom power is the path, also in meditation, rather than using a lot of effort.
Let's take a short break to enjoy a Buddhist song called Joy, Peace, and Laughed by wayfarers. This hymn is both profound and deeply spiritual. Let's come together and experience its beautiful melody and meaning.
I've got joy that flows within my heart, like a bird that flies in an evening sky. Within my heart there grows a spark, and it lights me up by and by. Let me share this joy with you, and the joy that so true. Once it comes to you, and this joy will help someone someday to walk the Dharma's way. I've got peace that lies within my mind, like a lake that rests on mountainside. Within my mind it love while walking ways untold to melt the heart so cold.
Now, let us focus our attention on Dr. Bhante Ponaji as he presents a series of talks on Buddhism as a religion. His insightful sermons on this topic guide us to the right path and enriched our understanding and inspire us to reflect on our way of thinking. Here is Dr. Bhante Ponaji to deliver the fourth part of his talk on this topic.
Now, in the same way, this potency, when the word is actualized, that potency, when it becomes real, it is called being actualized. The potential is actualized. When the potential is this ability, so the Buddhists believe that every human being can someday become a Buddha. What is that? That means the human being has this potential to become a Buddha. And that is, there is this ability to become a Buddha. And that means a potential that can be realized. And when the potential is realized, or actualized really, when the potential is actualized, that person is called a Buddha. So that is what is meant by a Buddha. So when we talk about religion and see how religion progresses, when it comes to the highest point, it is a Buddha. So when we look at it that way, Buddhism is the most advanced religion in the world. Now that is how religion evolves gradually. Now the point is that this kind of advancement of the human being up to the point of becoming a Buddha is a process of evolution. Now this is why we have been saying that Buddhism is a process of evolution of the human being. Now when we speak of evolution, normally we are speaking of what is called biological evolution. Now biological evolution is where we think of how the life began on this earth. Now when we speak of life, some people don't know what life is. We have to understand that what we call life, at least from a biological point of view, life is a chemical process. We can call it a biochemical process. Bio means life. That chemical, really it's a chemical process. And this chemical process is what is called metabolism. That word metabolism comes from somehow Latin or something like that, but still, which is really a chemical process going on. And in this process, there are two activities going on. What is called metabolism is catabolism and anabolism, two things. Now, when we speak of anabolism, we are talking about cells being formed. Because all organisms, whether plants or animals, are made up of cells. And the cell, of course, has something called a nucleus. And it is in this nucleus that there is a special thing called DNA and RNA and things like that, if you have heard. These are some kinds of molecules which carry these processes which continue, that begins to carry this process called metabolism. And especially it builds new molecules. It is a special thing that can build new molecules by absorbing atoms from the surroundings in the form of food and then building new molecules. But these new molecules that are broken, at least some of them will break down and produce at least send energy out. Because when molecules are formed by atoms coming together, you need a certain amount of energy to keep it together. And when it breaks down, the energy is released. And that energy can be used again to build new molecules. And so the process, two processes are going on at the same time. A building up process and a breaking down process. And both together is what is called metabolism. So the main thing in what we call life is this thing called metabolism. And so this continues. So the continuation of this is what we call life. And this Charles Darwin, who started speaking about evolution, he saw this process of building up and breaking down, but continuing. But however much we build up, it breaks down. But it doesn't stop there, it builds up again. And it breaks down. But still it builds up. So this process is what Charles Darwin saw as the struggle for existence. So there is a struggle to exist, although real existence is not there. Because everything that comes into existence breaks down. So when you are building new molecules, it is only a struggle to exist without a real existence there. And this is what kept evolution going. Because this process called metabolism continued. Of course, there were other problems coming up, because when the environmental conditions change, even that process cannot be continued. And so sometimes that whole chain of events break down and stop. But still there are some of these organisms who are able to adapt to the environmental conditions and keep going on. What is called living. Living means simply continuing this process. And because of this, these organisms continued to live But after adaptation, so these adaptations, of course, changed the nature of these organisms, and that is how gradually evolution took place. So we don't have the time to go into the full explanation of evolution, but the important thing is that there is this thing called struggle to exist. But the struggle to exist is there, but no one really existing. So what we call life is simply a struggle to exist without anyone existing. But of course, Darwin spoke of the survival of the fittest. Although he spoke of survival of the fittest, he was not referring to the survival of an individual. It was the survival of a generation of individuals. Now, just like Malaysia is a country where there are human beings. Every human being in Malaysia had to die. You don't know of any human being who had not died and kept on living for maybe hundreds and millions of years. No one lived like that. So that means every human being died. But the population of Malaysia gradually increases. Why? Because although all the individuals die, the generation continues. So that continuation of the generation is what Darwin referred to as survival of the species. Survival. The struggle for existence and the survival of the generation. So that survival is not a real survival. Every person had to die. But through this process of evolution, the human being came into being. It is through this process of evolution that ultimately a human being came into being. What is this thing called the human being? The human being, even before the human being, there were other animals who produced a thing called a brain. And the brain was able to control the whole body. But with the coming of the human being, a special kind of brain came up. And that brain was able to think and to reason out. Other brains were not able to do that. And because of this ability to think and reason out, that brain became conscious. The brain becoming conscious. So what is called consciousness is not the same thing as life. Life was an unconscious process going on. But it is with the coming of the brain, which is also evolved to a great extent. Not the ordinary brain. And with this brain, with that special part that can do the thinking called the cerebrum or the cerebral cortex. Now that part is able to think and become conscious. So becoming conscious, first that brain was able to become conscious of a world and a self in it. But after becoming conscious of a world and a self, this human brain was able to understand the world and even make microscopes, telescopes, and even airplanes, and even rockets that go to the moon or maybe even other planets. All that was possible for this brain, which was started unconsciously. Now it became conscious, and not only just conscious, became conscious of the world and how things are happening in the world, and became conscious of a very important principle called determinism. Determinism means, with the coming of this term determinism, people began to realize that this world is not controlled by invisible spirits, but everything that happens in the world happens only when the necessary conditions are present. And when the conditions are present, it happens. When the conditions are absent, it doesn't happen. The first problem that human beings had was how to set up a fire. Because if you have the fire, they can warm their houses or maybe even produce light. And not only that, you can also cook your food. Now, in ancient times, people didn't cook food because they didn't know how to make fire. But now, you just take a match and strike the match, flame comes up. How did that happen? They studied what are the conditions necessary for a flame to arise. And they produced the conditions, and then the flame came. And that match, when you strike the match, that is what happens. Well, even if a child who doesn't know about determinism or these conditions necessary for a flame to come up, still can strike the match without knowing anything, and still the flame comes up. This is because it has already been made by the whoever scientist or whoever who did it. So the important thing is that this knowledge of this principle called determinism help people to even make the airplane, the motor vehicle, even the electric lights, even the electric fan, air conditioning. All these things became possible only because they begin to know this thing called determinism. So, because of this, now the human beings have been able to produce what is called science. And with science we are having all the things, the comforts that we want. But still there are problems. And science, while it has been doing a lot of things, it has also created a lot of problems. With all the scientific abilities, where the human being has now been able to conquer nature to some extent, in that sense, but that conquest is useless because it has created problems. We are now frightened that the universe or the whole earth will come to an end with a nuclear war if it starts a nuclear war. And maybe now they are talking about air pollution and water pollution and talking about ozone layers, and all kinds of problems have come up with the coming of science. So science has not been able to solve the problems. That means the human beings have been trying to use this knowledge of science to conquer the world or the environment. But evolution took place not by conquering the world, but by adapting themselves to the environmental conditions. So science is not going in that way. Not adapting yourself, but trying to change the world. Now, there was a person long before the modern science came up, which came from the Western area. In the West, the scientists started there. But in India, more than 2000 years before that, a person, he also came to know this thing called determinism. He understood this law that everything happens only when the necessary conditions are present. And he saw that even the human mind that we are thinking of works according to this same law, the law of determinism. And he used this to change not the world, but to change the mind. And thereby, he transformed the human being. And when the human being was transformed, what was really done was that in the human being, when we speak of the human mind, the human mind has two parts, a thinking part and an emotional part. The emotional part is blind. The thinking part is aware of the world, and that is what we call consciousness, became conscious. So that this emotional part came before the thinking part. Now, even in other animals, you have the emotional part. The thinking part is there only for the human being, proper thinking. But in spite of all the science, the emotions are working. And when the emotions begin to work, there is fighting, quarreling, because all emotions are self-centered. They are only interested in themselves. So, when two people are interested in the same thing, what happens? They have to fight. So, it is this fighting that creates wars. Now, they are not only fighting alone. The fighting is between whole nations. Wars. And in these wars, they are still using these scientific things. And that is why we are frightened of nuclear wars. Because if they start using nuclear weapons, that will be the end of humanity. You see, this is the problem. So what this means is, these emotions are doing this because of these self-centered emotions which are blind. When the emotions come up, our thinking faculty also goes down. Now they have found that in the brain, there is a part of the brain which works like a switch. That switch controls whether you are going to use the emotional part or whether you are going to use the thinking part. So you can shut down the thinking part and start the emotional part going. Or you can shut down the emotional part and get the thinking part to start going. So this means that it is possible for us to change this thing that is going on. And that is that we can get rid of the emotions and start living rationally and intelligently. And that means if we can do that, the human being has evolved to a high level. That evolution up to the high level where the emotions are completely erased off and we are having only the thinking part, that is the meaning of becoming a Buddha or an Arahant. So that is what we are trying to do. You see, the important thing is to do this means we have to train ourselves to be conscious all the time. Because all emotions are going on unconsciously. It is by becoming conscious that the thinking part begins to work. So instead of being unconscious, we have to become conscious. That is what we call learning to meditate. Learning to meditate means we are learning to be conscious all the time. Now when we begin to meditate, you find that your mind goes in all directions. It's not the mind traveling somewhere, but these unconscious habits of thought come and overtake the mind. It is all coming unconsciously. These are habits of thought that we carry from childhood. Not only from childhood, it can come from our past lives also. So this why when we begin to meditate, we are training our mind to be conscious all the time. And if we can become conscious all the time, and these other thoughts stop coming, then we'll be acting in the right way all the time. We are not carried away by the emotional impulses. So this needs training. That training is what we call meditation.
That is all for today. If you have any questions or concerns, please contact us at info@buddha-dharma-tv.com. We work hard to share the noble, peaceful, and sublime teachings of the Buddha with you, helping you pursue the spiritual path under his wisdom. Please encourage and support those interested in the rational and enlightenment teaching of the Buddha. Thank you for watching. We believe our program on Buddha Dharma TV will inspire peace lovers around the globe. Good night. Namo Buddhaya.